The stars went out, not all of them, not at once, but enough in a strip of sky, about 40 degrees wide on the outer edge of the Kepler watch zone that every long-range telescope on the HEC border stations registered the change at the same moment. The duty officers on 3 separate stations filed 3 separate reports within 60 seconds of each other. The reports were different in their wording. They were identical in their confusion. Something was out there, something very large, something that was blocking the light. The first ship cleared the FTL threshold at 3:47 station time, then another, then 5 more, then 20. The sensors at Kepler Station Bravo stopped counting at 39 and quietly began rebooting themselves, because 39 vessels of that mass crossing into charted space simultaneously was the kind of thing the sensors had not been programmed to believe. By 400, there were 47, each one the size of a city that had decided to grow upward until it ran out of ideas. They moved in a pattern, not random, not tactical, deliberate, like a sentence being written across the dark. The pattern meant something. 7 different xenolinguists at 7 different stations identified the pattern at the same time, and all 7 sent the same message up the chain. It spells a word, the word in 11 dead languages, languages belonging to species so old their names had become archaeological, translated to the same thing each time, the inevitable that was their name for themselves. Nobody slept at HEC command that night. Orathville stood at the forward observation deck of the throne of first light and looked at the small yellow star ahead of him and felt nothing but patience. He had felt this moment 47 times before. Not this exact moment, not this exact star, not this exact configuration of approaching lesser worlds, but the shape of it, the particular weight of it, the way the silence before a revelation pressed against the hull of a ship like water pressing against a swimmer's skin. He was tall, even by Vale standards, 7-limbed as all his kind were, 4 legs arranged in a wide, stable arc, 3 arms positioned in the upper body, the 2 outer ones longer, the central one shorter and more precise. His skin shifted color when he thought deeply, cycling through blues and golds that had no exact name in human language, though the closest words might have been cathedral and ember. His face held 4 eyes in a horizontal line, the outer 2 used for distance, the inner 2 for reading the faces of those he spoke to. He had spent 70 years perfecting the speech, not the words. The words were ancient, set down by the first consequent 12 generations back. What he had perfected was the delivery, the timing of each pause, the precise frequency modulation that made the voice resonate inside a listener's chest. Before their brain had processed single syllable, he had learned early in his ministry that belief was not a thought, it was a sensation. You did not convince a species to believe, you made believing feel like something that was already happening to their body, and then you gave that sensation a name. Name was always the same, the veil, the first made, the light givers, the architects of all living things. He looked at the yellow star, a small thing, warm and ordinary, the kind of star that breeds life in the wet, fragile, carbon-based manner, the kind that produces creatures who are afraid of the dark. Those were the easiest ones. He straightened his 3 arms. He thought of the 11 species who now contributed to the Dominion, their labor, their resources, their genuine and uncoerced worship given freely because they understood, as all rational creatures eventually understood, that being part of something eternal was better than being alone in a universe that did not care whether you existed. He was not a cruel being. He was not, even by his own honest accounting, a dishonest one. He believed in the way that a man who has never been questioned believes, that the veil were exactly what they said they were. The evidence was all around him. 4,000 years, 11 species, a dominion that stretched across a quarter of the charted galaxy. What else would you call that except divine? He nodded to his signal officer. The broadcast began. Duty Officer Priya Nair was on her third coffee of the shift when the signal hit every frequency simultaneously. It was not a standard broadcast. It did not come from a specific directional source. It came from the space between the 47 vessels, as though the ships themselves were just the speakers and something else entirely was the voice. It hit the station's electromagnetic receivers, its quantum entanglement relays, its backup analog systems, and Nair would swear to this in her report. It seemed to hit something inside her chest that was not a receiver at all. She sat very still for 8 seconds. The voice was enormous, not loud. Enormous, the way a mountain is not loud but is still too large to look at all at once. It spoke in a frequency that made the back of her teeth ache and the muscles along her spine do something they had never done before, which was try to stand up without being asked. She gripped the edge of her console. The words, when the translation software caught up, were, "We are the veil, we are the first made, before your sun burned we burned, before your world formed we built, you have been alone in your confusion for long enough, we have come to end your confusion, we are your makers, we are your purpose. You may now know peace because you are known." The voice paused. Nair became aware that she was holding her breath. She let it out. She pulled up the response protocol terminal. She looked at the 47 vessels on her scope, each one blotting out stars behind it. Each one so massive that her brain kept trying to reclassify them as geological features rather than ships. She opened Form 7C. Unverified entity, first contact, protocol, biological and technological classification request. She filled in what she could from sensor data. She left the rest blank. She attached a request for the unverified entities to submit the missing information at their earliest convenience. She sent it. She picked up her coffee. She looked at her colleague across the station floor, a young man named Betts, who had been sitting with his mouth open for the last 4 minutes. "File it up the chain," she said, "and tell the kitchen we're going to need more coffee." The Form 7C arrived on the throne of First Light 11 minutes after the broadcast. It arrived the way a pebble lands at the feet of a man who expected a crown. Orethvel's signal officer handed him the translation with the careful face of someone delivering news they were not sure how to survive. Delivering, he read it. Again, the document requested the veil's estimated biological classification, their technological development index as per HEC standard scale, the names and functions of the vessels in the fleet, the identity and authority level of the commanding entity, their home system coordinates for the purposes of, he paused here, certain Translation was wrong. Diplomatic registry. At the bottom, a small automated note, thank you for making contact with the human. Expeditionary compact. A representative will be in touch within 72 standard hours. If this contact is of an emergency nature, please indicate in the field marked contact urgency, field 7C2, page 2, Orathville set the document down. He stood at the window. For a long time, outside the yellow star burned the way it had always burned, steady, uninformed about the significance of this moment. His generals were waiting for him to speak. His consequent were waiting. The entire bridge had gone very still in the way that rooms go still when the person everyone is watching does something nobody can interpret. He thought of 11 species. He thought of the way they had each responded to the revelation, some with weeping, some with immediate prostration, some with a kind of full body stillness that looked like shock, but was actually the physiological response to awe. None of them had sent paperwork, he said to no one in particular. Send a follow-up broadcast, his signal officer blinked. The full revelation again, high. Consequent, no, he paused. Something shorter. Remind them who we are, what he felt. Standing there looking at the translated Form 7C, he did not have a word for it. His language was ancient and extremely precise about states of divine experience. It had 17 words for the different qualities of light. It had 9 words for the specific sensation of being worshipped. It had no word for what was happening in his chest. Right now, he filed it under confusion. He was wrong about what it was. He would keep being wrong. Admiral Sarah Vance was eating a sandwich when her calm opened turkey, mustard. The bread was slightly stale, because the Unbroken Covenant's kitchen had been running on reduced supply for 6 weeks while they waited out a resupply delay that logistics had promised to resolve and hadn't. She had stopped expecting logistics to resolve things on time roughly 15 years ago, and she had made peace with slightly stale bread in the way that you make peace with things that are annoying but not worth dying over. Admiral, her calm officer's voice, command wants you on the priority channel. It's about the contacts in the Kepler zone. She took another bite of her sandwich. She pulled up her personal terminal with her free hand and looked at the preliminary sensor data that had been sitting in her queue for the last 40 minutes. She looked at the count. She looked at the mass readings. She looked at the translation of the word the fleet's formation had spelled across the dark. The inevitable. She had been in the expeditionary for 31 years. She had made contact with 6 species. 2 of them had been friendly. 1 of them had been indifferent. 3 of them had tried to kill her in ways that ranged from conventional to deeply creative. None of them had opened with a word that meant the inevitable. She looked at the broadcast transcript that Near had already sent up. She read the words about being the first made and the architects of all living things. She read them the way she read everything, straight through, no expression, like she was reading a supply manifest. She set the transcript down. Get me a line to Kepler Bravo, she said. Yes, Admiral, she finished her sandwich. Ensign Deo Adami had been on the Unbroken Covenant for 11 weeks. He was 23 years old and had graduated 3rd in his class at the HEC Academy, which meant he was very good at things done in controlled environments, Space, he had discovered, was not a control environment. Space was controlled environment, floating inside something that had no interest in control at all. He was at his monitoring station on the secondary bridge deck when the alert cascade started, yellow first, then amber, then the kind of red that meant everyone stops what they were doing. He watched the data come in, the count, the mass, the broadcast translation. He was from Lagos, originally a city of 20 million people that had, in his experience, very little capacity to surprise him. He had seen things in Lagos that would make an experienced soldier take a breath. He did not consider himself easy to frighten. He was frightened, not in the theatrical way, not hands shaking, not vision going gray at the edges. In the quiet way, the way where his body kept functioning normally while some part of his brain, the part responsible for honest assessment, looked at the numbers on the screen and began doing arithmetic that ended in a very bad place. 47 ships, each one. He checked the mass readings again, then checked the unit conversion, because surely there was an error, each one with a mass greater than Earth's moon. He did the arithmetic. He looked away from the screen and looked at the other crew members around him, junior officers, most of them, some of them his age, some of them younger. They were all looking at their screens with the same expression, which was the expression of people who are doing arithmetic and getting the same answer he was getting. Then the word came down from the command deck. Admiral Vance had taken the situation under advisement. Admiral Vance had reviewed the broadcast, the sensor data, and Kepler Bravo's Form 7C response. Admiral Vance had said, quote, and had gone back to whatever she had been doing. Adami looked at the 47 ship contacts on his screen. He looked at the section of the board that showed the Covenant's current status: 1 ship, their ship, mid-class hull, 22 weapon systems, of which 19 were currently functional because 3 were waiting on the same resupply delay that had made the bread stale. He did not do that arithmetic. He decided very deliberately not to do that arithmetic. Orithville sent a second broadcast. This one was shorter, as he had instructed. It contained a demonstration. The veil did not threaten. Threats were the language of equals, and there were no equals here. Instead, they demonstrated the vessel of sacred evidence, a mid-fleet ship whose entire purpose was this specific function: move to a position beside a small, uninhabited moon in the outer system. The moon was approximately 700 km in diameter. It had no atmosphere, no liquid water, no life of any kind confirmed by the Veil's own scans, because they were thorough, because they did not want to accidentally destroy something that mattered. The vessel of sacred evidence fired its compression array, the moon, over a period of 4 minutes and 17 seconds, collapsed inward. Not exploded, not shattered, collapsed, compressing itself into a perfect geometric sphere, approximately 1/4 its original diameter, its surface smooth and mirror bright, rotating slowly in the orbital plane. It was beautiful, in the cold way that absolute force is sometimes beautiful. Orithville watched it happen and felt again the deep professional satisfaction of a man who is very good at his work. He had seen this demonstration convert 3 species in a single broadcast. Thorath had begun their first prayers before the compression was even complete. He waited The HEC response came 40 minutes later. It was from a Dr. Yale Hoffman at something called the University of New Geneva's Department of Astrophysics and Planetary Sciences. Dr. Hoffman expressed, in formal and enthusiastic terms, that the compression demonstration was a remarkable and unprecedented application of gravitational engineering and requested to know whether the Veil would be willing to share their methodology or, failing that, permit a team of researchers to study the resulting sphere at close range, as it represented a unique opportunity to examine macroscale gravitational compression effects in a natural vacuum environment. Dr. Hoffman had attached, as a gesture of goodwill, 3 papers she had written on related theoretical applications and hoped the Veil might find them interesting. Orithville read the message twice. He looked at the compressed moon. He looked at the message. He had used that demonstration 47 times. 47 times it had produced worship, surrender, or the kind of terrified frozen silence that preceded both. Not once had it produced academic correspondence on the secondary bridge deck of the Unbroken Covenant. Ensign Adami pulled up the full record of the day's events before his shift ended. He read the Form 7C. He read Dr. Hoffman's message. He read the automated acknowledgement from HEC Diplomatic Registry, which had assigned the Veil a case number and a provisional classification code, and informed them that their file had been added to the contact queue. He sat with all of it for a while outside the viewport beside his station. The stars were still mostly present. Veil fleet was far enough away that they were not yet blocking the light in any meaningful way. From this angle, the sky looked almost normal, almost like it had yesterday, when there were no 47 city-sized ships. At the edge of charted space, he thought about the moon. He thought about the fact that it had been compressed into a perfect sphere in just over 4 minutes, and that humanity's response to this had been to ask for research access. He thought about what that meant, about what kind of species looks at something that can crush a moon and thinks first, interesting. Tell me more. He wasn't sure if it made him proud or afraid. He looked at his hands. They were steady. That was good. He was grateful for that. Somewhere above him, on the command deck, Admiral Vance was presumably doing something, reviewing data, eating another sandwich, making the series of quiet, unhurried decisions that kept a ship and its crew moving in a direction that might, with luck and careful arithmetic, turn out to be the right one. He trusted her. He was not entirely sure why he trusted her. He had known her for 11 weeks. He had spoken to her directly twice, both times for less than 3 minutes. Both times about things that were administrative and routine, but he had watched her in those 11 weeks in the way that young people watch the people above them, looking for the thing that will tell them what to be, what kind of posture to adopt when the universe stops being cooperative. She was never startled. That was it. He had watched 47 moon-crushing ships arrive at the edge of human space, and he was fairly sure that somewhere on the command deck, Admiral Vance was not startled. He didn't know if that was a good quality or a broken one. He suspected it might be both. He filed his end-of-shift report. He went to the mess. For dinner, the bread was stale. He ate it anyway, on the throne of First Light. The fleet held position. The fleet had never held position before. They had always moved, arriving, approaching, descending into the reception of worship that followed. Revelation, as naturally as morning, followed dark. Holding position was not a posture. The dominion had a doctrine. For because it had never been necessary to wait, the gods had never had to wait. Orithful stood at his window for a long time after the shift cycle changed, and his attendants brought him his evening meal and his chamber filled with the soft harmonic tones that aided veil meditation. He stood and looked at the yellow star and felt the thing he was calling confusion. He was a precise being. He had precise language for precise experiences. He did not tolerate inexactness in his thinking, because inexactness was how errors entered a system. And in the work of divine ministry, errors had consequences that rippled outward through civilizations. He identified carefully the components of what he was feeling. There was the obvious part, the repeated HEC responses that had failed to follow any pattern he possessed a framework for. That was genuinely confusing, and confusion was real and known, and he could file it correctly. But under that, below the confusion, in a place he prodded carefully, like checking a bruise to confirm it was there. Something else, something his language did not have a word for, because in 4,000 years there had never been a reason to invent one. He pulled back from it. He sat down. He ate his meal. He listened to the harmonics. Tomorrow, he decided, he would escalate. He would send the consecration fleet, 80 vessels, the war made sacred, the ultimate expression of veiled divine authority. He had never needed them, but perhaps lesser species needed something bigger than a compressed moon to understand what was real and what was reverence, and what was the only natural response to standing in the presence of gods. He would give them something they could not file a research request about. He was sure of this. He was wrong about this too, but that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight the fleet held position in the dark at the edge of human space, and the stars burned around them, and 47 ships that had never once failed to bring a species to its knees waited for a species that had responded to their revelation with paperwork and academic enthusiasm, and the particular baffling, unmedicated audacity of people who had never once in all their small and fragile history learned the right way to be afraid. The gods waited. The mess hall of the unbroken covenant. A young ensign from Lagos ate stale bread. The universe, as it tends to do, continued regardless. The second day was quieter than the first. That was the part that stayed with Ensign Dea. Adami. Not the ships, not the compressed moon sitting in its orbit, like a polished stone that God had dropped and forgotten. The quiet, the way the unbroken covenant went about its business. Shift changes, meal rotations, the low hum of equipment, checks and status reports, as though 47 vessels the size of ambitions were not sitting at the edge of charted space, waiting for humanity to fall to its knees. People ate breakfast. People argued about the temperature in the secondary crew quarters, which had been running 3 degrees too warm for 6 weeks. Lieutenant Vasquez lost his coffee mug again and spent 20 minutes looking for it, and eventually found it in the engineering section, which made no geographical sense, and which he blamed loudly on Petty Officer Chen, who denied everything. The mug argument was still going when Adami sat down at his station and pulled up the overnight report. 47 contacts still stationary. The compressed moon still rotating. 3 more institutions had submitted research access requests to the Veil. Fleet, 2 universities, and something called the Applied Gravitational Systems Consortium, which Adami had never heard of but which apparently had strong feelings about macro-scale compression events. He looked at the Veil fleet on his scope. He thought about the fact that they were still there, still waiting. He had grown up near the ocean. He knew in the bone-deep way that people who grow up near large bodies of water know that the most dangerous thing about the sea was not the storms. Storms made noise. Storms announced themselves. The dangerous thing was the stillness. Before something changed, the particular quality of water going flat and smooth and ready. The Veil fleet had that quality. He filed his start of shift notes and said nothing about it to anyone because the people around him were arguing about a coffee mug, and he did not want to be the person who interrupted a coffee mug argument with his feelings about water. On the morning of the 3rd day, HEC Command sent a representative, not a military representative, a diplomatic one, Ambassador Selene Broussard, who had spent 20 years in Xeno relations and who wore the specific expression of a woman who has seen enough to be calm about most things, but who was, nevertheless, checking the sensor readings on her shuttle with slightly more frequency than usual as she approached the Veil fleet's outer perimeter. She sent a hailing signal on the frequency the Veil had used for their broadcasts. She waited. The response came back in 19 seconds, faster than she expected. The Veil were attentive. She noted that a voice, not the enormous voice from the broadcast, this one was modulated down, precise, clipped, still deep, still carrying that undertone that made her back teeth ache if she didn't consciously relax her jaw. You approach the fleet of the first made Ambassador Selene Broussard Human Expeditionary Compact Diplomatic Corps. She said, I'm here to facilitate communication between the Veil Dominion and the HEC. I'd like to request permission to come aboard. A pause. You wish to board, if that's agreeable? Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. You do not send a leader. I am a leader, she said. Pleasantly, a diplomatic one. In the HEC, diplomatic leadership handles first contact situations. Military leadership handles other situations. We try to be specific about which tools we use for which jobs. The pause this time was long enough that she drank half her coffee. You may approach. She noted the pause. Length. She noted the tone of the final 2 words, not gracious, not welcoming. Something that sounded like a man who was offered a door that he expected to remain closed and is now trying to understand why it opened. She filed that note. It would matter later. Broussard spent 6 hours aboard the throne of First Light. She met Orathville in a chamber that had been designed to produce awe. Vaulted ceilings that caught the light of stars through transparent panels. Surfaces that seemed to breathe with slow bioluminescent color. Acoustics that made every sound resonate as though it were significant. She recognized the design intent, the way a carpenter recognizes joinery. Competent work. Very effective work, probably on species encountering it without prior experience. She sat down in the chair. They offered her a compromised piece of furniture, since Veil physiology did not use chairs, and they had fabricated one based on what they assumed a human chair should look like. It was slightly too tall and slightly too firm and positioned at an angle that put her mild physical discomfort, which she suspected was not accidental. She said nothing about the chair. Orethville spoke of the Dominion. He spoke of the 11 species within it, their thriving, their peace, their elevation from confusion to purpose. He spoke with the fluency of a man who has given the same speech many times and who believes it completely, which she found more interesting than if he had been cynical. Cynical was easy. True belief was something else. She listened. She asked questions, careful ones, the kind that expressed curiosity rather than challenge. She asked about the 11 species. She asked about what their lives looked like before and after Dominion membership. She asked about trade, about resource distribution, about governance structure. Orethville answered he was, she noted, genuinely proud, not performing pride, actually proud the way a builder is proud of something they built with their own hands over a very long time. She listened to all of it, then she said, the heck appreciates the information. We'll need time to review and consult internally before any further discussions. Orethville looked at her with all four eyes. How much time? He said. She considered 60 days would be reasonable starting point. The chamber was very quiet. 60 days. He repeated, give or take. These decisions involve a lot of stakeholders. On our end, democracy is thorough, if not always fast. She said it without irony. That was the part that stayed with Orethville. Afterward, she said it as a simple fact. The way you state the weather. She thanked him for his hospitality. She stood up from the slightly wrong chair without any visible discomfort. She shook, or rather attempted to approximate a handshake given the differences in limb configuration. His central arm, which startled him considerably since no lesser species representative had ever initiated physical contact with a high consequent. She left. Orethville stood in the chamber for a long time after her shuttle had cleared the perimeter. 60 days. They wanted 60 days. He had delivered the revelation 11 times. The average surrender to worship transition had taken 4 days. The longest had been the Thureth, who were a stubborn and geologically minded species, and they had taken 19 days. 60. He walked to his window and looked at the yellow star and identified again the thing beneath the confusion, the unnamed thing. He pressed at it and then withdrew. Before he got too close to knowing what it was, he called his generals together. It was time, he decided, to demonstrate something that could not be filed or studied or given a 60-day review period. The demonstration happened at 1400 station time on the 4th day. The Vale moved 3 of their larger vessels into a triangular formation, approximately 2 million kilometers from the nearest inhabited HEC colony, Threshold Station, a mid-sized orbital platform housing about 40,000 people. They did not approach the station. They positioned themselves where the station's population would be able to see them clearly with unassisted vision from the observation decks. Then the 3 ships activated their surface illumination arrays. They lit up. Not lit up the way a building lights up, lit up the way a star lights up, pouring light outward in directed columns that were visible across millions of kilometers, shifting through frequencies that moved from infrared through visible spectrum into ultraviolet in slow, hypnotic waves. The pattern was not Random, the light spelled words, they. Same words as always, the same words. That had 11 times before preceded the moment a species understood that there was something in the universe so much larger than itself that resistance was simply not a category worth considering. On Threshold Station, 40,000 people went to their observation decks. They watched. The light was genuinely extraordinary. Objective accounts from observers would later describe it as the most purely beautiful thing they had ever seen, a thing that made the human visual system feel inadequate and overwhelmed. And grateful for the overwhelm, people cried, several of them standing at the observation decks in the soft light of 3 ships the size of mountains. People cried because beautiful things sometimes make people cry, and this was, whatever else it was, beautiful. Then someone in the observation deck crowd said loudly, "Is that a coordinated light show?" And someone else said, "I think it's spelling something," and a third person pulled out a translation app and said, "It says they're gods," and the crowd was quiet for a moment, and then someone laughed, not cruel laughter, not mocking laughter, the specific laugh of a person who has just processed something their brain is having trouble fitting into a normal category. The laugh spread not because it was funny exactly, but because laughter is what humans do when they are looking at something enormous and incomprehensible, and their body needs to do something that isn't screaming. Within an hour, someone had posted a clip from the observation deck. Within 3 hours, it had more views than anything else in the HEC media network. Within 6 hours, the comments were mostly jokes. The press conference was not Vance's idea. Command wanted visible senior military presence in public comms. The public was doing the thing that publics do when something large and inexplicable appears on their doorstep, cycling between fascination and low-grade dread and the particular human mechanism of deflecting both with humor. Command wanted someone steady and credible in front of a camera. They called Vance. She accepted the way she accepted everything, with a single sound that conveyed acknowledgement without enthusiasm. The press conference was held aboard the Covenant in a briefing room with the HEC flag behind her and a table in front of her, and 12 journalists arranged in a semicircle with the politely predatory energy of journalists who know they are covering something significant and want their moment of it. She sat down. She poured water from the pitcher on the table. She looked at the journalists with the look that 31 years of command gives a person, the look that is not aggressive and not warm, but is completely exhaustingly unimpressed. The questions came. She answered them. Troop movements not discussable. Civilian evacuation protocols in review. Details forthcoming. HEC diplomatic position. Broussard's team was handling it, functioning well. Then a journalist from the Sol System Independent Network, young, ambitious, slightly flushed with the importance of the moment, leaned forward and asked the question everyone was thinking. "Admiral, do you personally believe the Vials claim? Do you think they might actually be gods?" The room went still. Vance looked at him. She picked up her water glass. She drank. She set it down. "I believe," she said, "that they've got big ships and a marketing problem." The room was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then it wasn't. Adami watched the clip 4 times. He watched it the first time on his personal terminal during his break, because it was in his newsfeed and he clicked without thinking. He watched it the second time because he wanted to make sure he had heard correctly. He watched the third time to study Vance's face, the specific flatness of it, the complete absence of performance in it, the way she said the words, the way a person states something that has been true for a long time and is not worth being dramatic about. He watched the fourth time because he couldn't stop. Big ships and a marketing problem. 47 ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. The compressed moon, the light show, 6 hours of coordinated illumination designed by beings who had been doing this for 4,000 years, refined across 11 species level conversions, optimized for the specific visual and psychological architecture of creatures who were afraid of the dark. And Vance had called it a marketing problem. The clip reached 30 million views before his shift started. By the time his shift ended, it was at 200 million. By the next morning, it had been translated into 67 languages, including 3 vile dialects by vile language scholars who had been working around the clock since the fleet arrived. Adami sat at his station and watched the view counter and felt something. He did not have a complete name for something that was not quite pride and not quite fear, and sat precisely between the two, the way knife edge sits between the things on either side of it. He thought about what it meant to be this kind of species, the kind that looks at something that crushed a moon and asks for research access, the kind that watches a divine light show and makes jokes about it, the kind whose admiral, when asked if she believes in gods, says marketing problem, and means it the way she means everything, completely without performance, as a simple statement of what is real. He thought about what it would look like from outside, from the vile side of the scope. 4,000 years, 11 species, a formula that had never once failed, and then this collection of organisms that should have been terrified and were instead doing what? Laughing, filing forms, eating stale bread, arguing about coffee mugs, requesting 60 days for an internal review. He thought about the vile fleet out there in the dark. 47 ships, holding position, waiting for a response that the biology of every previous species had made inevitable, and getting instead a press conference clip that was approaching 300 million views and a comment section full of jokes about divine marketing budgets. He sat with all of that. Then he went back to his monitoring work because his monitoring work needed doing. The scout vessel left the vile fleet at 2:11 on the 6th day. It was not a combat vessel. It was mid-sized, large by human standards, but small within the vile fleet's context. The kind of ship used for close reconnaissance. It crossed the designated contact boundary between the fleet's position and HEC charted space, which had been established by the HEC border protocol and communicated to the vile in their initial form, 7C paperwork. The Covenant registered it at 2:13. Adami on early shift flagged it at 2:14. Vance was notified at 2:15. At 2:16, a response was transmitted to the vile fleet, a formal notification that a vessel had crossed the contact boundary without authorization and was requested to return to its prior position. Scout vessel did not return. It continued. At 2:31, the Covenant's long-range sensors registered the scout vessel's position as 17,000 km inside the contact boundary at 232. The sensors registered nothing. The vessel was gone, not destroyed. No energy signature consistent with a weapon strike. No debris field. No radiation bloom. Gone the way a thing goes when it is no longer in the place. It was without any of the expected evidence of how that happened. Adami stared at the blank space on his scope. Where the contact had been, he looked at it for a long time. He did not ask what happened to it. He was 23 and 11 weeks into his posting, and there were things he had learned that junior officers did not ask about in open comms, because the asking was less important than the knowing, which was that something had happened, something deliberate and clean and completely unannounced, and that whoever had arranged for it to happen had not seen fit to explain themselves. He filed the contact losses per standard protocol. He moved on the throne of First Light. The report of the scout vessel's disappearance arrived on Orthel's desk at 300. He read it 3 times, not because it was complicated, because he needed 3 readings to accept that it said what it said. The vessel was gone. No battle, no warning, no debris, no communication from the crew. Simply gone, removed from existence as cleanly as if someone had reached into space and closed their hand around it. He called his generals. They argued for immediate retaliation. A strike on Threshold Station, the inhabited platform. The 3 illumination vessels had positioned near. It would be visible. It would be conclusive. It would demonstrate with finality that there was no version of this interaction where humanity's small gestures of defiance went unanswered. Orthel refused. He refused not because he was merciful. He had destroyed things before when destruction was theologically appropriate, but because the destruction of civilians was not in the Revelation's framework. You did not break what you came to elevate. You did not harm what you came to save. The moment you harmed them, you stopped being a god and started being a conqueror. And those were not the same thing, and the difference mattered enormously, and he had spent 70 years holding that line, because the line was where the truth lived. But the scout vessel was gone. 23 crew gone. He stood at his window and looked at the yellow star and thought about what kind of species receives a divine light show, watches it with observable tears, and then quietly removes a reconnaissance vessel from existence without comment or explanation. The unnamed thing under the confusion pressed upward. He stepped back from it. He thought about the 11 species, the Thurath, the patient, stone-minded Thurath who had held out for 19 days and then come to the revelation with a sincerity that had genuinely moved him. He thought about the worship that had followed, the genuine comfort the dominion had given to creatures who had been afraid and alone in the dark. He thought about how the formula worked because it was true. It was true. It had to be true. He straightened all 3 arms. He looked at his generals. Deploy the consecration fleet, he said. Generals were quiet for a moment because the consecration fleet was not something you deployed casually. It was not a weapon in the conventional sense. It was a statement, the largest possible statement, written in 80 vessels and several thousand years of unbroken divine authority. It had never been deployed. It had never needed to be. All 80 vessels high consecrant, his lead general asked, All 80, he said it. The way you say a thing you are sure of. The way you say a thing that has never been wrong. Adeyemi was off shift when the news came down the Vale were moving additional vessels into the contact zone, not 47, 80 more, on top of the 47. Already there, he was in the mess eating dinner. The bread was still stale. He read the alert on his personal terminal and then set the terminal face down on the table. He ate the rest of his dinner. He thought about the water near Lagos, the way it went flat and smooth before something changed. He thought about his sister back home who was 12 and wanted to be a xenobiologist. He thought about the letter he owed her, which he had been putting off writing because he didn't know what to say that was honest without being frightening. He thought about Vance, about the press conference clip, about the specific quality of a person who was not startled. He picked up his bread. He finished it. He decided he would write the letter tomorrow. He didn't know what it would say yet, but tomorrow seemed like a reasonable place to start. He went to bed. 127 Vale vessels held position at the edge of human space. Humanity's response across all public communication channels continued to be jokes. Nobody on the Covenant slept particularly well. Nobody said so out loud. They were that kind of crew. The consecration fleet arrived the way a closing door arrives all at once. No staggered entry, no careful formation. Building across 20 minutes of sensor contact, 80 vessels dropping out of FTL simultaneously in a ring pattern that surrounded the existing 47 like a fist closing around something small. The combined sensor reading across every HEC border station and deep space monitoring platform registered the event as a single catastrophic spike, and 3 stations briefly went offline because their systems had not been built to count that high that fast. 127 ships. The number sat in Adeyemi's vision like something with too many edges to look at. Straight, he was on shift when they came through. He saw it happen on his scope. In real time, the contacts blooming like something flowering wrong. Each one enormous, each one adding its mass to a collective weight that the scope rendered in a shade of red his screen had not used before. He said nothing. The bridge around him said nothing. The quiet was the kind that comes when a room full of people all do the same arithmetic at the same time and get the same answer, and the answer is the kind you don't say out loud. He looked at his scope. He looked at the single contact marker that represented the unbroken Covenant. He looked at the 127 contacts surrounding it. He picked up his water. He drank. He set it down. He went back to his monitoring work. This was the only thing he could think of to do. Vance was on the command deck when the fleet arrived. She watched it on the main scope, the full display 2M wide, showing the surrounding space in a radius of 4 million kilometers. She watched the 80 new contacts appear. She watched the formation close. She stood with her coffee in her hand and her weight on her back foot, and she looked at the scope the way she looked at everything, which was the way a doctor looks at an X-ray, reading it, not reacting to it. Her XO was Commander Ibera, 15 years in, compact and precise. The kind of officer who did not fidget. He was not fidgeting, but his jaw was set in a way it hadn't been an hour ago. Admiral, he said, recommended action. She looked at the scope. She looked at the formation. She looked at the geometry of 127 vessels arranged in a pattern that, from certain angles, resembled a hand about to close. She thought about a thing she had decided 3 months ago, in a room on HEC command with 6 other people who all had the same clearance level and the same tired eyes and the same understanding of what was probably coming. She thought about what had been agreed in that room and what had been positioned and where and why and at what cost and how long it had been sitting there waiting. Hold position, she said. Ibera looked at her. Hold, she said again. He nodded. He turned back to his station. He held. Vance drank her coffee. Orethville looked at the scope. 1 ship. He had confirmed it 3 times because once was insufficient for something this improbable and twice was still not enough. 3 times, his sensor team confirmed it. 3 times, there was 1 human vessel, the same mid-class ship that had been registered in the contact zone since the first day, the unbroken Covenant Registry, HECMCV 7741, sitting alone at the center of the consecration fleet's formation, not retreating, not hailing, not doing anything at all, just sitting there. 1 ship, his lead general standing to his left, said what they were all thinking. They have not moved. I see that. It is an insult, the general said. Deliberate, they want us to see that. They are not afraid. Orethville looked at the 1 ship on his scope. He thought about the paperwork, the research requests, the press conference clip, which his intelligence officers had translated and shown him and which had produced in his chest the first genuine flash of something sharp and hot that he had experienced in a very long time. The ambassador with the wrong chair, the 60 days, 1 ship. He thought about what it meant, not tactically. The tactical calculation was simple and required no time at all. What it meant underneath the tactics, what it said about the creatures inside it. He had spent his career reading species, reading the way they moved and what they built and how they organized their fear, because all species organized their fear into structures, into gods or governments or armies or stories. And if you understood the structure of a species' fear, you understood everything about them. He looked at the 1 ship. He was trying to understand the structure of their fear. He could not find it. Prepare the weapons array, he said. All arrays high consecrant. He looked at the 1 ship. Yes, he said. Let us be done with this. The channel open, not from Vance's end, from the veil, a direct hail to the Covenant's command frequency, precise and clean. No interference, no limbic response modulation, just a signal opened and waiting. Vance set down her coffee. She accepted the hail. Orethville's voice came through the bridge speakers, not the broadcast voice, not the enormous one, but the real one, the one he used in chambers when the performance was over and the actual conversation needed to happen. It was still deep. It still had weight, but it was a voice, just a voice, and Vance listened to it the way she listened to all voices. He said, you have 1 ship. Yes, she said. You understand what you are facing. Yes. A pause. Then you understand. He said that what you are doing is not courage, it is something else. I would like to understand what it is. Vance was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone searching for words, the quiet of someone deciding which true thing to say from the several available. Orethville, she said, this is Admiral Sarah Vance, HES Unbroken Covenant. We've reviewed your revelation. Our answer is no. You have 1 opportunity to turn your fleet around. After that, we start. Silence on both sides of the Channel on the Covenant's bridge. Nobody breathed in the vile command. Chamber nobody moved. The channel was still open. Both sides could hear the ambient sound of each other's ships, the low mechanical breath of systems running, the distant structural creaks of large vessels holding position in the cold. Then Orethville said very quietly, so quietly that the translation software barely caught it, something that in vile had no clean equivalent in human language. The closest rendering was, so this is what it sounds like. Then the channel closed. Then the veil fired. It was not one weapon. It was not a warning shot, not a targeted strike, not the kind of measured application of force that leaves room for interpretation. It was the full, simultaneous output of 127 warships, firing every weapon system they had at a single target. It looked on sensor records reviewed later like a small star being born. The light was visible from Threshold Station with the naked eye. The shockwave from the combined energy output registered on seismic monitors on the third planet in the system. At the center of it, where the unbroken Covenant had been, where the scope said it still was, where every targeting calculation confirmed the strike had landed, was fire, a great deal of fire. Adeyemi watched it on his scope and stopped breathing. The fire expanded outward. The sensors reported energy readings that were objectively incompatible with the survival of any human-built vessel. Then the fire cleared. The Covenant's contact marker was still on the scope. Hull scorched, one engine signature reduced to 15%. Lateral shielding compromised along the port side. A list of secondary system failures scrolling down the damage report that Adeyemi was pulling up because his hands needed something to do. Still there, one ship still there. Adeyemi became aware that he was gripping his console with both hands, hard enough that his fingers hurt. He became aware that his mouth was open. He closed it. He looked at the contact marker. He looked at the damage report. He thought how the answer to how had begun 3 months ago in a room on HEC command with 6 people who all understood that a species announcing themselves as gods across multiple frequencies was probably not going to accept a polite refusal. The Covenant had not arrived at the contact zone alone. It had arrived first, visibly, loudly, with its registry transponder broadcasting on every channel one ship, exactly as advertised. What it had also done over the following 3 months was serve as the focal point for a veil fleet whose own sensor arrays were, by design, focused forward and outward, looking for threats, looking for incoming vessels, looking at the one human ship sitting improbably in the middle of everything, not looking behind them, not looking at the dead space in the sensor blind created by the veil fleet's own formation. The geometry of 127 large vessels produced shadow zones, and shadow zones, if you knew where they would be before the fleet arrived, could be used. 41 human vessels had been in position for 9 weeks. Not worship. Smaller, faster, carrying collectively a strike package that had taken 11 engineers and a team from theoretical weapons applications 18 months to design around one specific question: what does a species with 4,000-year-old weapons technology not know to defend against? The answer, after 18 months, had been angles. The Veil's defensive systems were built for direct engagement, for threats that announced themselves, that came in Formation that behaved the way military force behaves when it is confident in its strength. They were not built for 41 small vessels firing from inside their own formation's geometry, from the shadow zones that shouldn't have had anything in them, from angles that the defensive arrays had not been oriented to cover because those angles had been considered safe. The Veil fired everything they had at the Covenant. The Covenant absorbed it behind shielding that had been specifically over-engineered for this moment, behind a hull that had been reinforced to the point of structural absurdity, behind the understanding that the ship didn't need to win the exchange, it just needed to survive long enough. 8 minutes, that was the number, 8 minutes, from the first Veil weapons discharge, for the strike package to fully execute. The Covenant needed to hold for 8 minutes. It held for 8 minutes and 40 seconds. The first impact hit the Veil fleet from a direction that their sensors had classified as empty, then a second, then 7 simultaneously, then a rolling cascade of strikes that moved through the consecration fleet's formation like a hand running along a keyboard, methodical, deliberate, one after another, not every Veil ship was destroyed. That was not the goal. The goal was specific systems, weapon arrays, drive cores, FTL capability. The strike package had been designed not to kill but to stop, to remove the ability to move and the ability to fire, to leave crews alive and ships intact but frozen, drifting, unable to do anything except watch. The Veil return fire was immediate and disorganized because the attacks were coming from inside their formation, from positions that should have been impossible, and disorganized fire from ships that cannot find their target is noise, not threat. On the Covenant's bridge, the 8 minutes looked like this. Adami, both hands on his console, watching the damage report scroll and the Veil weapons fire trace across his scope, and the 41 friendly contacts bloom into activity from the shadow zones, watching the strike package execute contact by contact down the list like items being crossed off in a grocery run. This one done, this one done, this one done. Vance standing, not sitting, which was the only visible sign that this moment was different from any other. Her coffee was on the console beside her. She had not touched it. The hull screaming twice, not groaning actually. Screaming, the sound of a large metal structure being pushed past comfortable limits by energy discharges that would have killed anything with thinner skin. The port side lights dropping for 4 seconds and coming back. Vasquez's coffee mug, the one he'd found in engineering, sliding off a console ledge and shattering on the floor, and someone somewhere in the bridge making a sound that was almost a laugh, high and involuntary, and immediately swallowed. 8 minutes, 8 minutes and 40 seconds. Then Ibora said from his station very calmly, strike package fully executed, Admiral, confirmed. Contact loss on 63 Veil vessels, 18. Confirmed mobility disabled. 12. Remaining contacts showing full capability. Vance picked up her coffee. She drank, she set it down, she opened the channel. Orithville was still standing when the channel opened. He had not sat down during the 8 minutes. He had stood and watched his fleet, his consecration fleet, the sacred made weapon, the statement that had never needed making because no species had ever required it, come apart in a way that his mind could not fully process in real time, not destroyed all at once. Piece by piece, contact by contact. Methodically from inside his own formation, from angles his defensive doctrine had no category for with. Weapons he had not detected and could not target, his generals were talking. All of them. Loud overlapping voices calculating and recalculating and finding no calculation that made sense of what had just happened. He heard none of it. He was looking at his scope. 63 vessels gone, 18 frozen, 12 remaining, 1 human ship hull scorched, 1 engine compromised, still on the scope, still there. The channel opened. The voice that came through was not raised, it was not triumphant, it was the same voice as before, level, slightly dry, the voice of someone stating a thing that has been true for a while. Vance said, "Your move, the bridge of the throne of first light was absolutely silent, not the silence of people who have nothing to say, the silence of people who are watching a man they have followed for 70 years. Understand something that none of them have words for." Orithville looked at the scope. He looked at the one ship. He looked at his own hands, all 3 of them, and noticed that his bioluminescence had changed, not deliberately. His skin had been cycling through its usual golds and cathedral blues for most of the engagement, and now it had shifted to something he could not name, a color that was not in the veil palette for conscious states. It was the color of involuntary things. He stood with it. He looked at the scope. He thought about 4,000 years. He thought about 11 species. He thought about the formula, the one that was true, the one that had always been true, the one he had spent his life carrying, the way you carry something precious that has never once been dropped. He thought about the one ship. He had no framework. That was the thing, not the tactical loss. Losses could be processed, studied, learned from. The thing he had no framework for was simpler than that. He had looked into the structure of their fear. He had found nothing, not because they were fearless. He had understood enough from the intercepted comms, the body language of the ambassador, the grip marks on consoles that censored data had shown him. In the Covenant's own recordings, they were afraid. The young ensign on the secondary deck, the XO with the set jaw, even perhaps the Admiral herself, in ways that did not reach the surface. They were afraid, and they had done it anyway, and that specifically was what his language had no word for. Because in 4,000 years of ministry, not one species had ever been afraid and said no anyway, not one. He stood at his scope and looked at the one ship and felt the unnamed thing rise up from beneath the confusion, and he let it come, this time all the way to the surface. He named it. He was right about what it was. He sat down, first time in 8 minutes. He sat down heavily, the way something sits when it has been holding weight it did not know it was holding, and the weight is suddenly gone. He looked at his generals, all of them waiting, all of them looking at him the way they had always looked at him, for the next word, the next direction, the shape of what came after. He said nothing for a long time, then do not return fire. High consecrant, do not return fire. They were quiet outside. 12 consecration fleet vessels held position in the dark. Around them the wreckage in the drifting, and the silence of 63 ships that had never once been needed before. Today the Covenant held position. Channel was still open. Adami sat at his station with his hands in his lap. The bridge had been quiet since Vance's last transmission. Not the arithmetic quiet of before. Something else, something that was trying to figure out what shape it was, what category it fit into, what the right response was to the last 8 minutes and 40 seconds. He looked at his scope. He looked at the damage report still. Scrolling, he thought about the 41 small ships that had been sitting in the dark for 9 weeks, waiting. He thought about the people in those ships, the crews who had been living in sensor shadow for 9 weeks, eating whatever their small galleys could manage, sleeping in rotation, saying nothing on any frequency because silence was the entire weapon, silence. And patience and angles, 9 weeks. He thought about what kind of species plans. Something like that he thought about. What kind of species looks at 127 divine vessels and thinks will need to be sneaky. He thought about his mother in Lagos, about his sister who wanted to be a xenobiologist. He thought about the letter he still hadn't written. Across the scope, the 12 remaining veil contacts held position. Not advancing, not retreating, sitting. The way something sits when it is deciding what it is now. Vance was still standing. Her coffee was cold. She had not noticed the hull was still radiating heat from the port side. Impacts, Adami could feel it faintly. Through his station panel, a warmth that was not comfortable but was real, was present, was the physical record of what had just happened, pressed into the skin of the ship. He put his hands back on his console. He went back to his monitoring work. His hands were steady. He noticed that he held it the way you hold small good things when the larger things are still unresolved. The scope showed one human ship scorched, listing slightly to port, one engine running at 15% still. There, his ship still there. The 12 remaining veil vessels did not move for 9 hours. They sat in formation, a tighter one than before, instinctive. The way creatures huddle when the thing they feared has proven itself worth fearing. The wreckage of the consecration fleet drifted around them in pieces that the Covenant sensors cataloged without comment. 63 ships reduced to various states of silence, 18 more still powered but unable to move, their drive systems stripped with surgical precision by the strike package, their crews alive and presumably sitting in the same silence. Their commanders were sitting in. Covenant held its position. Vance let them sit. Ibera asked twice whether they should advance, push the advantage, reduce the remaining 12 to the same stillness as the others, close the operation. Twice Vance said no. She said it without elaboration, without explanation, the way she said most things, as a complete sentence that did not require the support of addition. Sentences. Adami, watching from his station, thought he understood. You did not kick a thing when it was sitting with itself, not because of mercy, though mercy was part of it, because the sitting was the point, because the 12 ships staying there, engines cold, weapons silent, looking at what was left of 80 vessels that had never once been needed until today. That was a lesson being learned in real time, and interrupting a lesson before it finished was wasteful. He was not sure if that was actually what Vance was thinking. He thought it might be. He went back to his scope and watched the 12 contacts in, waited the way the ship was waiting, and tried not to think too hard about his hands, which were steady, which he was grateful for every time he noticed. Orathval requested communication on the 14th hour, not a broadcast. A direct channel ship-to-ship command. To command, the frequency that meant. This is not a performance. This is two people who need to say something to each other without an audience. Vance accepted. He spoke. Without preamble. He offered what he had to offer. The Dominion's accumulated resource. Wealth was significant, cataloged across 4,000 years and 11 species worth of tribute. He offered technology. Gravitational compression, FTL. Refinements that human engineers had not yet reached, medical knowledge from 11 biological traditions, some of which addressed conditions that heck medicine was still treating with hope and guesswork. He offered elevated status within the Dominion, a seat at the governing body, a voice in how the collective was run. He offered all of it in the flat tone of a man who knows he is offering the wrong things but has not yet learned what the right things would be. Vance listened. She let him finish. Then she said, "We don't want what you're selling." A pause. "Name what you want," Orithville said. "I have not survived 70 years in ministry by being inflexible. Tell me what the HEC requires, and I will determine what is possible." Vance was quiet for a moment. Through the open channel he could hear her ship, the structural sounds of a hull that had taken significant damage and was redistributing the stress, the low, altered pitch of a drive running on reduced capacity, the ambient hum of people continuing to work inside something that had been pushed very hard. "Nothing from you," she said. "That's the point." Another pause. "I don't understand," he said. "I know." She picked up her coffee cold. She drank it anyway. "That's also the point." He was quiet. For a long time, she let him be quiet. Then he said something that surprised her, which was not a common occurrence. He said, "What are you afraid of?" She considered the question. "Lots of things," she said, "but not you, not anymore. You had one move and you made it, and now we both know what it was worth." A pause. "Go home, Orithville. Take your 12 ships and go home. Tell them what happened. Tell them exactly what happened. You are letting us leave." "Yes, my generals will call it mercy. Your generals can call it whatever helps them sleep." Another silence. "What do you call it?" he said. Vance looked at her scope, at the 12 contacts, at the drifting field of what had been 80 ships. "Information," she said. "Shared freely, no charge." She closed the channel. The 12 ships left 3 hours later. They moved slowly, not tactically, not retreating in a controlled military withdrawal, but slowly, the way something moves when it is uncertain of the ground in front of it. They cleared the contact zone. They cleared the debris field of their own fleet, moving through it in a path that required careful navigation around pieces of ships they had known, crews they had known. They did not look back in any way that sensors could measure. Adami watched them go. He watched the contact markers diminish with distance, still visible on long range, then of range, then gone, swallowed by the dark, the way things are when they have traveled far enough away that the instruments can no longer hold them. Gone. He sat for a moment with the absence on his scope. Then the alert started. The first anomaly came from Dominion-controlled space, a system called Vetharuna, home to species they Vale called the Marith, a small, quiet people, 6-limbed, photosynthetic, who had been under Dominion authority for 260 years and who had, by all available records, been model members Their tribute payments were on time. Their consecration temple was maintained, their designated veil. Liaison reported no problems, had never reported problems, had filed the same assessment every cycle for the last 40 years. The anomaly. The tribute shipment from Vetharuna was not on the transit schedule. HEC intelligence flagged it as a potential signal of something but wasn't sure what. They noted it, they moved on. Second anomaly came 6 hours later from a system 3 sectors away. A species called the Oreth Tall, silicon-based, had been under dominion authority for 800 years. Their consecration temple had sent a maintenance request to the Veil. Administrative network, routine temple. Required replacement of the central illumination array, which was how the Veil broadcast the daily revelation to the population. The request specified that the replacement was needed because the current array had been dismantled by the Oreth. Heck, intelligence flagged this one louder. They called it a data point and scheduled it for analysis. Data points came in faster after that. By the second day there were 11. By the third day 47. By the end of the first week, Heck, intelligence had stopped calling them data points and had started calling them what they were, which was a pattern, and the pattern was this: every species currently under Veil dominion authority had in some form, in some way, proportional to their resources and circumstances, begun doing the same thing. Stopping the tribute shipment stopped first, easiest, most immediate, requiring the least coordination and the most courage, just not loading the ships, just letting the deadline pass, just sitting with the silence of a thing you have done every cycle for generations and choosing this cycle not to do it. Then the temples, some dismantled, some simply closed doors, shut lights off, the daily revelation broadcast into empty rooms, some left standing but emptied of the objects of worship. The sacred items returned to Veil administrative offices in carefully packed containers with polite notes attached. The Thureth, the stubborn geological Thureth who had held out 19 days before the revelation and who had converted with a sincerity that Orathful still remembered, sent their note in a container with 11 smaller containers nested inside it, one for each of the sacred objects they had kept for 600 years. The note said, "We have been considering the recent events. We believe we require more time." Heck, intelligence called Commander Ibera to a briefing to walk him through the pattern. Ibera looked at the map. Every Dominion-controlled system flagged in sequence of their reported changes and was quiet for a moment. All of them, he said. All 11, the intelligence officer said, in various stages, some faster, some slower, but all of them moving. Ibera looked at the map. He thought about the one ship, about 8 minutes, about 41 smaller vessels sitting in the dark for 9 weeks. He thought about the Veil's 47-ship first fleet built for revelation and the 80-ship consecration fleet built for finality, and how neither of them had one. He thought about what Vance had said when he'd asked why she was letting the 12 remaining ships go. Information shared freely, no charge. The 12 ships that left, he said, Orethville's ships. They went back through Dominion space. Yes, the officer said. They passed through these systems. Yes. Ebar looked at the map. They saw it happening, he said, in real time. As they traveled, they watched their own empire. Yes, the officer said. He didn't finish the sentence, neither did she. The Ureth broadcast arrived on the 15th day. The Ureth were not a prominent species. They were small, a population of perhaps 12 million on a single moon orbiting a gas giant in the outer. They had been under Vale authority for 600 years. They had no military, no spacefaring capability of their own, no resources of particular value. They had, by every external measure, the least reason to move first and the most reason to stay still and wait to see what the larger species did. The broadcast came on the Vale's own holy frequency, the one reserved exclusively for Vale divine transmissions, the sacred channel that only the Vale used, that no species in 11 had ever dared touch. The broadcast was one word in Vile. No, that was all one word on the holy frequency. From a species of 12 million on a single moon, 600 years into their subjugation, HEC intelligence received it. They decoded it. They sat with it. Then one of the analysts, a young woman named Park, who had been on 12 consecutive hours of intercept monitoring and who was perhaps slightly past the point of professional detachment, read the translation and aloud to the room quietly, the way you read something that deserves to be heard. No, the room was quiet then. Park said, to no one in particular. 12 million people. No warships. 600 years. Nobody added anything to that. Adami was pulling double shifts, not by order, by choice, or what passed for choice when you were 23 and the most significant thing in living history was happening on your scope and going off. Shift felt like turning your back on it. He slept in 4-hour blocks. He ate at his station. He watched the pattern build across the Dominion's territory like something catching light, this system, then that one, then 3 more, then a cascade. He thought about fire, about how fire moved not because each burning thing decided to burn, but because heat transfers, because the condition for burning spreads through contact, because a single ignition point, if it burns hot enough and long enough, changes the conditions for everything around it. He thought about one ship. He thought about what it had done and what it had not done. It had not liberated anyone, had not swept through Dominion space with weapons hot, breaking chains, delivering freedom in the military sense that stories usually meant when they used the word liberation. It had done one thing. It had held for 8 minutes and 40 seconds against 127 ships and stayed on the scope afterward. It had shown 12 million Ureth on a single moon, and 600 years of Thurath, and 800 years of Oreth, and 260 years of Myreth, and every other species that had ever felt the veil frequency shake their bones and their back teeth. It had shown all of them what the thing looked like when it was possible, not certain, not easy, not without cost. Possibly that was all it had shown them. It was enough. He was writing the letter to his sister. He was writing it in pieces between monitoring checks. Paragraph here, 3 sentences there. Building it the way you build something when you are not sure yet what it will look like when it is finished, but you know it needs building. He had not found the right words for the main thing yet, for what he wanted to say. He kept circling it. He wrote about the bread. He wrote about Vasquez's coffee mug. He wrote about the scope and what it looked like when 127 contact markers became 12, and what the 12 looked like when they turned and left. He wrote I keep thinking about what it means. That we laughed, he wrote, not because we weren't afraid. We were afraid, everyone on this ship was afraid, and I think the Admiral was afraid too, underneath wherever she keeps it, but we laughed anyway at the light show, at the press conference, at all of it, and I think there is something in that I don't fully understand yet. He stopped, he read what he'd written. He added, I think maybe it has something to do with what you can't take from something that doesn't believe it belongs to you. He saved the letter. He went back to his scope. On the 21st day, Orathville addressed the Dominion Council. It was not a public address. The chamber held 31 council members, representatives of the Vale's internal governing body, the people who had managed the practical reality of a divine empire for 300 years, while the High Consequence managed its theology. He stood before them. He had prepared nothing. He told them what had happened. Exactly all of it. From the Form 7C to the press conference clip to Browsard's visit to the compressed moon, to the 8 minutes and 40 seconds to the 12 ships turning and leaving through an empire that was, by the time they arrived home, not entirely the empire they had left. He told it plainly, no framing, no context designed to soften or explain or make it something other than what it was. The council was quiet when he finished. A senior council member, older even than Orathville, one who had served since before his ministry began, said, "What action do you recommend we take?" Orathville looked at the council. He looked at 31 faces that were cycling through the same colors his had cycled through when he sat down in the command chair after Vance's last transmission. Blues and golds gone strange. The involuntary palette. We should understand, he said, that we have spent 4,000 years mistaking compliance for confirmation. The chamber was very quiet. Compliance, he said again, not belief, not genuine recognition of what we are. Compliance produced by fear, by awe, by the demonstration of force so total that refusal seemed not just dangerous but literally unimaginable. He paused. The humans made it imaginable. That is what they did. That is the only thing they did, and it was enough. An elder to his left said, "Are you saying the revelation is false?" Orathville looked at him. He thought about the answer to that question. He thought about it the way he had thought about it since the 14th hour, when the 12 ships had turned to leave and he had watched the contact markers diminish and felt the thing he had finally named settle into its permanent residence inside him. "I am saying," he said carefully, "that a truth which requires fear to survive is not the kind of truth I thought we had." Nobody answered. The chamber held the silence the way chambers hold things that are too large and too dense to be moved immediately, the way they absorb and wait and let time do what argument cannot. He did not stay for the debate that followed. He went to his quarters. He stood at his window. The view from this window was different than the view from the throne of first light, a courtyard, a pale sky, the ordinary light of a home star that had been burning since before his faith existed and would burn long after. Whatever came next, he looked at his hands. He thought about 11 species. He thought about the Thurath, the sincere, stone-minded, genuinely converted Thurath, and wondered what they were thinking tonight, whether what they had felt in the revelation had been real, even if the framework around it was wrong, whether meaning and truth were the same thing, or whether they could be separated, and what you were left with if they were. He stood at his window for a long time. He did not reach any conclusions. He suspected that was appropriate. On the Covenant, Vance signed the after-action report. It was long. After-action reports for events of this scale were always long, pages of system logs, damage assessments, weapons, deployment authorizations, communication, transcripts, strike package execution, records, casualty reports, no HEC casualties. That was the line she read. Twice she had read it in the preliminary, and she read it in the final. And she read it the way she read everything straight through, no expression. Then she set the report down and sat at her desk for a moment in the way she almost never sat, doing nothing. Not reading, not reviewing, not the productive stillness of a person whose mind is working on the next task, just sitting. She thought about a ship she had commanded 22 years ago. A smaller ship, a crew of 91, a species that had also announced themselves with grandeur, with overwhelming force, with the absolute certainty of things that had never lost. She thought about the 43 names she still knew in order. She looked at the after-action report. No HEC casualties. She picked up the report, she signed it, she put it in the outgoing stack. She went to get more coffee. Adami finished the letter on the 23rd day. It was longer than he intended. It covered things he hadn't planned to cover: the bread, the mug, the scope, the 8 minutes, the Eurathen. Their one word on the holy frequency. The pattern spreading through the dominion like heat, finding the conditions to travel. The last paragraph took him the longest. He wrote, I don't know what happens next. I don't think anyone does. The vials still exist. Their ships are still out there. The 11 species are in the middle of something they have never done before, and they will need things from us and from themselves that nobody has figured out how to provide yet. The galaxy looks different than it did a month ago, and I am not sure we have the right words for what it looks like now. He wrote, but I keep thinking about the Urath, 12 million people, no warships, 600 years of being told what they were, and who made them, and what their purpose was, and they listened one day to a press conference clip, and they found a word that their language already had, but that they had never once applied to the thing in front of them. He wrote, no, he wrote, I think that is the whole story. I think everything else, the ship, the battle, the 8 minutes, was just us showing them that the word existed, that it was a real word, that words like that have weight when you use them, and that the weight is survivable. He paused. He added at the very end, stay curious about the aliens, Amara, but don't be afraid of them. The ones worth understanding are the ones trying to understand us back, the ones who aren't. We've handled worse. He sent the letter. He went back to his scope. Contact zone was quiet. The debris field was being cataloged by a salvage team. The 12 Veil ships were somewhere in Dominion space, traveling home through an empire that was deciding system by system in its own time and in its own way what it was going to be now. The Covenant held its position, scorched, listing slightly, one engine at 15% and holding still there. The stars burned around it the way they always burned, steady, indifferent, older than every story ever told about them by every species that had ever looked up and felt the particular human terror of the dark, and the particular human compulsion to put something in it, something vast and knowing and permanent, something that would look back. The stars did not look back. They just burned, and in the light they made, one battered ship sat in the quiet of a contact zone that was no longer a flashpoint, but not yet a resolution. In the long, complicated middle space between what had been and what came next, and waited the way humans wait, with coffee getting cold, with bread going stale, with letters written and sent, and a scope to watch and work to do, in the steady, unremarkable, undefeatable habit of continuing, always that continuing. They claimed to be gods until a human battleship destroyed everything they believed. Part 5. The word that outlives the ship, the unbroken covenant, came home on a Tuesday. Nobody had planned for Tuesday specifically. The repair timeline had shifted twice. First, because the portside shield emitters needed replacement components that were on a supply chain with opinions about punctuality, and second, because one of the 41 smaller vessels from the strike package had sustained damage that required the Covenant to reduce speed and convoy. You did not leave your own people behind in deep space to make a better entrance. That was not the kind of fleet the HEC ran. So it was Tuesday. The dry dock facility above New Geneva was quiet when they arrived, not empty. Facilities like this were never empty, but running at the particular reduced pace of a place that has been waiting for something and is now absorbing the reality of its arrival. Dock crews in magnetic boots moved along the Covenant's scorched hull with the careful attention of people reading a text they have not seen before, tracing the burns and the stress fractures and the places where the hull plating had warped under energy loads. It was never designed to survive. The portside damage was significant. One dock crew chief, a woman named Brandt, who had been inspecting military vessels for 19 years and who had seen things come back from combat in states that required creativity to classify, stood at the portside midship section for a long time. She ran her hand along a section of hull where the plating had not simply buckled but had actually crystallized. The metal changed at a molecular level by sustained energy discharge. She had never seen that before. She took 3 photos and filed them with the material science team and did not say anything dramatic about them, because she was not a dramatic person, but she stood there. For a while, the Covenant settled into its dry dock cradle. The umbilicals locked. The crew disembarkation began in the orderly, unhurried sequence that Vance had always preferred. No ceremony, no rushing, no symbolic first steps. The people who needed to get off the ship got off the ship in the order that made logistical sense. Adami stepped onto the dry dock platform at 1340 station time. He stopped. He stood for a moment on the solid, non-moving, non-listing, non-heat radiating platform and breathed. Around him the dock moved. Crews and cargo lifters and the ordinary machinery of a facility receiving a ship. After a long absence, noise and task in the smell of recycled station air, which was different from recycled ship air in a way he could not define but could immediately feel. He had been on the Covenant for 31 weeks. He stood on the platform. He breathed. Then he picked up his kit bag and he went to debrief. There were 4 debriefs over the following 6 days. The first was tactical, a room of senior officers reviewing the strike package execution. The 8 minutes, the damage sustained, the outcomes achieved, Adami was not senior enough to be in that room. He sat in an anteroom and answered specific questions when called upon and waited when he was not. The second was psychological, standard post-engagement assessment, mandatory for all crew who had been on a vessel under sustained weapons fire. A counselor named Dr. Reyes, mild-mannered and precise, asked Adami questions about sleep and appetite in moments when he found himself back on the bridge without choosing to be there. He answered honestly, the sleep was uneven, he was eating fine. Yes, he sometimes found himself watching a scope that was not there. Dr. Reyes noted everything. She did not perform concern. She was simply thorough, and thoroughness felt like the right thing in that room. The third debrief was intelligence, what he had observed, what he had heard, any details from his monitoring station that had not been captured in the official record. He gave it all. He was good at observation. That was the part of the job he was genuinely good at, and he knew it. And he was precise about it in the debrief, the way he was precise about it. On shift, the fourth debrief was the strangest one, a small room, 2 people he had not met before, civilian, no uniforms, the kind of quiet that suggested they were used to rooms like this. They asked him not about the battle or the damage or his psychological state. They asked him what he thought it meant. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about what he had written to his sister. He thought about the Ureth. He thought about Areth Vel's voice on the open channel, not the broadcast voice, the real one, asking what kind of thing it was when a species was afraid and said no anyway. He said, I think we gave them a word. The 2 civilians looked at him, the species and the Dominion. He said they already had the word. Every language has the word. It's short. It's one of the first words any species ever invents because it's a survival word. You need it before you need almost anything else. He paused. I think they had the word and they had forgotten they were allowed to use it on something that big, and we reminded them. The civilians wrote things down. One of them asked, how does that make you feel? Adami thought about it. Like we did something real, he said, not just the battle, the whole thing, the paperwork and the press conference and the 60 days and the 8 minutes. All of it together was one argument made in different ways, and the argument was just you can say no, it is survivable. We will show you. He paused. I hope it was worth what it cost them, he said. The ones who said it first. The ones who stopped the tribute before. They knew we would back them up. The Ureth. He looked at the table. 12 million people, no warships. They said no on the holy frequency before they knew how it would land, before they knew anything except that someone else had said it first. He was quiet. That took something I don't have a word for. The civilians wrote that down too. He went back to his quarters. He slept for 11 hours without moving. He went home for 2 weeks before his next posting. Lagos was Lagos, full volume, full color, 20 million people with no interest in making room for anyone who needed quiet. He loved it without reservation, the way you love the place that made you, with all its noise and its insistence and its absolute refusal to be anything other than exactly itself. His mother fed him for 4 days without asking much. She was a practical woman. She could see what he looked like when he walked through the door, and she understood, without being told, that he needed to eat and sleep and exist in a place that smelled like home before he needed to talk about anything. On the 5th day, she made tea and sat across from him at the kitchen table and said, "So," he told her, "not everything, not the classified pieces, not the strike package details, not the specific tactical numbers, but the shape of it. The 47 ships in the paperwork, the press conference, Browser's chair, the 8 minutes, the Urath." She listened, she drank her tea, she did not perform shock or awe or the particular dramatic response that the story seemed in some tellings to invite. When he finished, she said, "And you're all right, it was not quite a question." "Yes," he said. She looked at him the way mothers look at their children when they are deciding whether the answer they gave is the true one. She decided it was true enough. She made more tea. His sister Amara had read the letter 6 times. She had read it the way she read things that mattered, slowly the first time, faster the second, then slow again for the parts she wanted to keep. She had shown it to her friend Kemi, who found the part about the coffee mug funny. She had not shown it to anyone else because some things were not for sharing, and she understood at 12 which things those were. She had questions, not the questions her teachers would ask or the questions the news feeds encouraged, not about the military outcome or the diplomatic implications or what it meant for HEC expansion policy in the outer sector. Those questions existed and were real and would matter in ways she would understand better when she was older. She had a different question. She had been sitting with it since the 3rd reading, turning it over the way she turned over interesting specimens, the ones that did not behave the way the textbook said they should, the ones that made her look at the textbook and then back at the specimen and think, one of these is wrong. On the 6th day her brother came home. She waited until after dinner, until their mother had gone to the other room and the table was cleared and the kitchen had the quality of the end of a day. Then she sat across from him and said, "I have a question about the veil." He looked at her. "About what they claimed," she said. "About the God thing." "Okay," he said. She thought about how to phrase it. She was precise with language in the way that people who want to be scientists are precise, understanding that the words you choose change the thing you are measuring. If they needed us to believe it, she said, were they ever actually gods at all? The kitchen was quiet. Sounds of Lagos came through the window. Traffic, music from somewhere too. Streets over. The specific layered noise of a city that did not turn down for anything. Underneath it all, the ordinary quiet of 2 people sitting at a table at the end of a day. Adami looked at his sister. She was 12. She had their mother's eyes and their father's stubbornness and something that was entirely her own quality of attention that made things feel, when she looked at them, like they were being genuinely seen for the first time. He thought about a Rathville, about the chamber with the wrong chair, and the vaulted ceilings and the bioluminescence that had gone strain. Colors on the bridge. He thought about 4,000 years and 11 species and a faith that had never once been tested because testing it had never been an option anyone had considered offering. He thought about what happens to a truth that has only ever lived inside a room where disagreement is not permitted. He thought about the Urat. He thought about one word on a holy frequency. He said, I don't know, Amara nodded. She had expected that answer or something close to it. She was not disappointed by it. Honest uncertainty was more interesting to her than confident answers that had not earned their confidence. But I think, he said carefully, that the question is going to matter for a long time. She thought about that. Longer than the battle, she said. Much longer than the battle, he said. The battle was 8 minutes. The question is, he stopped. He looked at his hands. Steady. Always steady since he'd noticed them on the scope. The question is going to be around for as long as there are species asking it, he said, which means it's going to be around for a very long time. She sat with that. Outside, Lagos continued in its full volume, full color way. The music from 2 streets over shifted to something with more bass. A transport somewhere nearby sounded its alert tone twice and then went quiet. I want to study them, Amara said. The Veil and the other species, the ones in the Dominion. I know, he said. There's going to be a lot to understand. Yes, he said. There is. She nodded. That was settled then. She got up and cleared the last of the cups from the table, because clearing the table was her job, and she did her jobs even when other things were happening. She rinsed them at the sink. She put them in the rack, she said with her back to him, the way she said things when she was still thinking them through. If they needed belief to be gods, then maybe belief was the thing that mattered, not them, the belief itself. He was quiet. And if the belief is gone, she said, it doesn't matter what they are. It matters what everyone else decides to be instead. She finished the dishes. She went to her room. He sat at the table for a while. He did not know that night what Amara would do with the question. He did not know that she would carry it into a xenobiology degree and then a doctoral program in what would eventually be called comparative belief systems, a discipline that did not exist yet and would take 40 years and several significant arguments about methodology before it was accepted as a real field. He did not know that her work on the post-Dominion psychological reconstruction of subjugated species would change how the HEC approached every first contact that followed. He did not know that the question she had asked in the kitchen in Lagos over clear dishes and city noise would become the opening line of her most important paper, printed exactly as she had said it at 12 years old, sitting across from her brother, who had come home from a battle that had lasted 8 minutes and 40 seconds and changed the shape of the galaxy. He sat at the table. He thought about the Covenant, dry dock, about Brandt's hand on the crystallized hull, about the portside lights that had dropped for 4 seconds and come back, about Vasquez's mug shattered on the floor, and the involuntary, almost laugh from someone on the bridge at the exact worst possible moment. He thought about Vance, about what she was doing right now, probably somewhere in a hearing, probably drinking cold coffee, probably saying as little as possible with the specific efficiency of a person who knows the value of silence. He thought about a Rathvel, about what a god does when the room that held the belief empties out, about whether you could be a thing without the agreement of others that the thing was real, about what it cost to spend 70 years certain of something and then sit down heavy in the command chair of a ship surrounded by the wreckage of the certainty. He did not reach any conclusions. He thought that was probably appropriate somewhere in The outer sectors, the Uret moon turned. On its axis the way it had always turned, the holy frequency was quiet. Now no veil broadcasts. No daily revelation shaking the bones of 12 million people before their brains could filter it, just silence on the channel. Clean and total and belonging entirely to them. Some of them found the silence strange. 600 years of sound on that frequency, and now nothing. A few of the oldest, those who had known the revelation their entire lives, said privately that they missed it, not because they believed it, not anymore, but because it had been there, consistent and enormous, and the absence of it had a shape they were still learning to fill. Others found they silence the best thing they had ever heard. Most of them were somewhere between both. They were figuring it out in the way of things that are worked through rather than resolved, slowly and imperfectly, and at the pace of people who are doing something they have never done before. Without a map, the moon turned. The gas giant it orbited, enormous, indifferent, banded in the colors of a long, slow storm, moved through its own orbit the way it had moved for 4 billion years, before the veil, before the Uret, before anything that used language to describe itself or others. The stars above the Uret moon were many and old and said nothing. They never did. They just burned the way they had always burned, in all directions, without preference or purpose, making light because that was the physical consequence of what they were, not because anyone needed them to, not because anyone had built them to, not because the light meant anything except itself. The Uret looked up at them as they had always looked up, as all things with eyes eventually look up. And for the first time in 600 years, when they looked, they were looking with the specific quality of creatures who have remembered, not learned, remembered. The way a body remembers how to breathe when something stops pressing against its chest, that the dark above them was theirs, that it had always been theirs, that it belonged to everyone who looked at it and no one who demanded they look away. The moon turned. The night came as nights do, and in Lagos, in a city of 20 million people, with no interest in turning down for anything, a 12-year-old girl sat at her desk and opened a blank document and wrote at the top, in the careful handwriting of someone who takes the first line of a thing seriously, if they needed us to believe it, were they ever really gods at all? She looked at the line, she thought about it, she did not answer it yet. She left it there at the top of the empty page and went to sleep. The question sat in the dark of the room after she was gone, patient, the way all good questions are patient, waiting for the work that would eventually come.